Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby with my co-host, George Hirsch, bringing you the latest episode of Running, State of the Sport. This week, our special guest is Marty Dugard, author of a fantastic new running book called The Long Run, which hits bookstores across the country on April 14th.
Marty wrote several of his articles for Runner's World in the late 1980s and then gained considerably more attention when he collaborated with media personality Bill O'Reilly on a series of best-selling historical books with titles like Killing Lincoln, Killing Kennedy, Killing Jesus, and so on. Marty's been an avid runner and adventure racer all his life and has also coached high school cross country in California the last 15 years.
The Long Run basically traces the American running boom from 1970 to 1984 and Joan Benoit's victory in the first Olympic marathon for women. Dugard's got a breezy, fast-paced writing style that makes his books a real page-turner. This one will fit in lots of important details about the running boom for younger readers who might not know all of the stuff that is presented, and it will just give a lot of pleasant memories for us veteran runners. But before we talk with Marty, let's look at the biggest recent news in running. George, what's been drawing your attention?
It's April, Amby, so that means all attention focused on the Boston and London marathons, which both seem to have faster, deeper fields than ever before. I don't know how they keep doing it, but they're raising the bar somehow. And in London, the spotlight is firmly on a rematch between the two most dominant men in the sport right now. Sebastian Sawe, the Kenyan, who is the defending champion. He's on an incredible streak, having won London in 2025 and Berlin also last year. Back-to-back victories. He predicts a course record. Amby, that means something faster than 2:01:25. Is going to be required to win this year, and he may be right in that he'll be facing Jacob Kiplimo from Uganda, who's the world record holder in the half marathon at 57:20, and actually Kiplimo's even run faster than that in a time that's not been certified, and he was last year's London runner-up. Throw into the mix Jomis Kachelka, who I think is a real wild card here. He's been a fantastic runner on the track. He was the world record in the mile indoors, and he's got just incredible half marathon pedigree. He is a debutante to keep your eye on. And then in the women's field, you've got these super fast women, Amby. Tigist Hasefa, who comes in with a 2:11:53 that she ran in Berlin in 2023. The defending champion in women's only world record holder in a race with women only, and that's Jocelyn Chepkosgei of Kenya, who ran a 2:14 flat. And there's also Perez Cheptegei. She also has an exact 2:14:00 when she won Valencia this past year, but not very fast compared to these 2:14:2:11 women. There's Helen Obiri. Her time, I guess we'd call it a slowish 2:17:42. But the thing about Helen Obiri is she wins races. She's won Boston twice. She's won New York twice. As you and I know, she's coached by Dathan Ritzenheim, and just last month, she won the very prestigious New York City half marathon. So now we're going to see what Helen can do on a super fast course. It probably would have even been more perfect if Sifan Hassan, the Olympic champion, didn't have to scratch out of the race, which was unfortunate. She had to withdraw just a couple of weeks ago due to an Achilles injury, which she sustained, actually, Amby, on a treadmill workout. So she must have been pushing it on that one. So what's coming up in Boston, Amby?
Well, Boston certainly has enough entertainment and speed to keep us occupied this coming week from now. In the men's race, the defending champion and I think heavy favorite is John Career. He won last year, as I said, and last December brought his own PR in the marathon down to 2:02:24 at Valencia. So he looks really strong to me, but you can never count out Benson Kipruto, who won New York City last fall and has won other big races. He was out of the picture for a few years. Now he's kind of back in there. So I think they're going to battle it out. And the field's so deep, there'll be others, of course, as well. Unfortunately, the American who maybe would have been matching them, Connor Mance, has decided that he's not fit enough after a long injury to start the race. So he's will not start. We'll have to wait another 6 or 12 months for Connor to run the marathon again. In the women's race, I think Sharon Lachetti is the woman to beat. She's defending champion. She's such a strong marathon runner that she will be very tough. But, there might be an American close to her, and that's Fiona O'Keefe, who was very close to the leaders in New York City last fall. Of course, she won our Olympic marathon trials in 2020, and she's been running great recently. The American field at Boston is almost like an Olympic trials field. It's got all of the top runners, including Emily Sisson, the American record holder, and Dakota Popane, who was also on the Olympic team in 2024. And as far as the American men go, I think Clayton Young has been getting a lot of the attention, deservedly. He's run a couple of very strong Bostons, but I don't think he's necessarily going to have an easy day against some other Americans like Zohair Talby, who ran 2:05:45 in Houston earlier this year, and Wesley Kiptoo, who was eighth, is that right, who ran a 2:08 in Boston last year. He seems stronger this year, and he's well known for his high-risk, fast, early racing in the big events. We might even see him out front, so that could be fun. So Boston's strong all the way around. And, there's one other familiar Boston face who will be running in the marathon this year, and that's Des Linden, the 2018 winner, in that cold, stormy, rainy day that I remember too well. What's interesting about Des this year is she has just completed the 6-day Marathon des Sables in the Sahara Desert, where they have to carry their packs and food on their back. The organizers give them a little rain and a little water and shelter at the end, but otherwise they have to carry heavy packs. Des finished third in that event. One of the days was 100K, that's 62 miles, which entailed more than 12 hours of running in the sand, in the Sahara. I'm not sure how they do it, but Des is coming back and running London with her husband, and then I think she's running Boston, with her husband, and then she's going to go to London and run with I don't know whom. But it's going to be a really big couple of weeks of marathon running, and we are looking forward to it. And so that's it for our roundup of the biggest recent news in running. This week, our special guest is best-selling author Martin Dugard, who has an exciting new running book coming out the week before the Boston Marathon.
Marty, and he told us we could call him that, is perhaps best known for the book series he co-authored with television commentator Bill O'Reilly. These books often had the word killing in the title, like Killing Lincoln, about Abraham Lincoln's assassination. But The Long Run is a pure running book, through and through. I read it a couple of months ago and found it one of the best running books I've ever read.
I've also read it, and I concur with George. If you're a runner, particularly a veteran runner, I can almost guarantee that you'll enjoy The Long Run. I want to add that Marty has written a number of other books entirely on his own, some historical, about historic war events, and some about extreme adventure running events he competed in a few years back. Marty, welcome to the podcast, Running State of the Sport. We're excited to have you with us today.
Amby and George, I'm honored to be here.
Well, Marty, let's begin with a brief bio update. Tell us a little about you, your age, where you're living, your family situation. You know, what's a typical day like from the time you get up in the morning?
That's a good question. I'm just a working writer. I get up about 6:30. I do coffee, feed the dogs, read the paper. I still read the actual paper. I start writing about 8. I write till about 11:30. If I get to 1,000 words before then I knock off before then. Then I go work out, whether I go run or ride the Peloton, or just go for a hike. And then at about 2 o'clock, I go down to the local high school where I coach the distance runners in the cross country team. And then on the way home, I stop and have a beer. Then I sit in the backyard and read a book, and then I wake up and do it all over again.
That's not a bad life, Marty. You know, I've got to begin by reminiscing about your early writing days when Runner's World was a place that you wrote some great articles for, maybe 30 years ago. For some reason, one really stuck in my head because it was a relationship piece. It was about you running with your father and how those runs changed your relationship with him. Am I recalling that correctly? And do you remember that piece?
Oh, I remember it. I remember it really well. And I have to say, back when I wrote for Runner's World, I was still kind of I only started writing professionally in 1988, so I was still a relatively new runner. And I remember a piece of advice you gave to me that I'm sure you gave it to 1,000 people, but it was to write as if I was the New York Times, the authority on any topic. And I've never forgotten that because it kind of informs, every history book I've written, acting as if you have that voice. But yeah, that piece I wrote about me and my dad was special, and he remembers it to this day because it was kind of a surprise. I didn't tell him I was writing it, but when he read it, it's just very moving. It just kind of brought us closer together. He's still around. He's 93, and I see him every week. So that piece made a big difference.
So Marty, the running community, I don't think knew that you were working on the long run and isn't necessarily expecting it. So give us the elevator pitch. Why should the runners, our audience who are listening to this podcast, be interested in the long run? So it's an elevator, so you only get a minute or two.
The elevator pitch is that, my editor challenged me to step away from writing kind of more traditional history and to write something that I really knew well, something I'd lived through, which was the 1970s running boom, and on up to this day, because now that I'm coaching as well as running, I'm very entrenched in the running world. But what I like to tell people is it's not a book about the running boom. It's about a revolution. It's about a time when we went from a sedentary country where people didn't really work out from the 1970 New York Marathon to the 1976 marathon. The number of people competing in the race just exploded, and the whole sport changed. And it didn't just change running; it changed the way people travel, the way that developers build houses. Building trails between houses so people can go exercise. It's just one of those things that what happened in the 1970s with the running movement changed, globally, how we live our lives, what we eat, how we plan our vacations. It's pretty amazing.
I like that revolution framework. That's a good word to use in an elevator pitch. The beginning of a book is always a key point, as you know very, very well. So tell us where the long run begins and why it begins there.
Well, I opened with the 1970 New York Marathon, because it was the first, back when they did the loops in Central Park. But also, 127 people started, only 55 finished. Nina Kuksik was the only woman, and she wasn't able to finish that day. And it was just one of those things where nobody knew the New York Marathon was taking place in Central Park. Nobody even cared. Fast forward to today, we had almost 60,000 people run New York last year. It's an amazing thing. 30,000 people ran the New York half last weekend. It's just one of those things where you take that very, very, very small foundational startup in 1970, and you fast forward to, 5 decades later. It's phenomenal what has happened in that span of time.
So, Marty, in some ways, the long run reaches a boiling point on a single day in 1972. What was that day, And what happened then that was so pivotal?
Well, that's the day Frank Shorter won the Olympic marathon, September 10th, 1972, and it's for me, I was a young kind of wannabe runner. I was 11 years old, and I was so inspired by watching him do that I literally left the house and ran 4 miles. 11 years old. But the thing is, so did so many other people. All of a sudden, people wanted to run, and it was phenomenal the way that Frank's marathon victory changed everything. And Amby, you put it best in the book. You talked about how graceful his stride was and how effortless he looked, which everybody knows who's run a marathon that is not true. But he just powered through that race. And having gone to, I went during the research. I went to Munich and I went to the stadium. I saw parts of the marathon course, and it was really powerful going through certain parts of the course, realizing that with this epic moment in running history had taken place at this very spot.
Marty, unless I'm wrong, that wasn't the only big race that day in 1972. Certainly you covered others in the book. You want to tell us a little about them? Yeah,
there's a lot going on that day. What people don't realize is that in the same afternoon you had the marathon start. You had Steve Prefontaine in the men's 5, which was just one of the most epic races in history. Lasse Baron getting the win and pre-faltering and finished 4th. Jim Ryan doesn't make the final in the men's 15, having fallen in one of the heats and not being allowed back in. And it's just one of those things where, looking back in my memory, I just thought they'd all taken place on different days. But then when I looked at the Olympic schedule for that afternoon in 1972, I was amazed to see that everything had taken place, back to back to back. It was very, very, very powerful. And like I said, when I went to the Olympic Stadium, I sat high in the seats by where the broadcast booth is, and I was looking down at the track with pretty much the same point of view that the cameras had that day when, for instance, in the men's 5,000. And so what I did was I pulled the race up on my phone, a YouTube video, and I was sitting with my wife and I was showing her. I said, okay, that's where Pre kicked first. That's where he, Gamudi elbowed him. That's where Viren went, and she's watching it. She's looking at the phone, then she's looking at the spots on the track. And when Pre gets passed by Stewart, just yards before the finish, she gasped. She couldn't believe it happened. And the thing is, I knew it was about to happen, and I gasped too, because it was such a heartbreaking moment in track and field.
Marty, people reading The Long Run, of course, are not going to be surprised by the fact you've got chapters on Bill Rogers, Joan Benoit, Greta Weitz. Are there any lesser-known figures in your book that readers might not expect to encounter?
I think, well, not lesser known, just to make it clear, it's not a book just for boomers, because we go all the way through to modern times. Des Linden is fairly significant towards the end of the book. Oprah makes an appearance. There's a lot in the book. There's a bit about Jim Fixx. Kenny Moore, one of my favorite running writers of all time, plays a fairly prominent role because he has such a critical mind, not just for running, but also for the way that the sport should be represented in the written word. And I think that's kind of fun. John F. Kennedy makes an appearance. And we have all these people. And that was the fun about writing this book because, again, when I took it on, I had only my personal recollections. And in my mind, Frank Shorter was the one person who started the running boom. And what I didn't realize as I put it all together, there were so many other dynamic things happening at the same time that just kind of all collided. Again, it's this revolution, and you have all these diverse stories that come together to make the sport suddenly just explode in popularity.
I like that big picture view, Marty. So we're going to come back to The Long Run in a few minutes because there's still more to say about it. But let's backtrack and get a little bit more personal now. Talk about yourself. When and how did you become a runner and endurance athlete? What drew you into the sport at a young age?
Going back to my dad, when I was 6 years old, my dad, that was kind of when Kenneth Cooper had come out with aerobics, and my dad was an Air Force pilot, and the Air Force began to suggest that their officers take up an exercise regime, and he became a runner. He went on to run Boston 2 or 3 times. His official time is 2:48, but he swears his gun time is 2:44. But I put 2:48 in the book. But so I would, just my dad was a runner, and then it was just one of those things where my brother and I both became runners, kind of just following in his footsteps. And, I went on to race competitively in high school and in college. I ran at North Michigan University. And then, there really wasn't, I was not an Olympic hopeful. So after college, I went the standard route. I did triathlons for a while. I ran a few marathons. I did adventure racing for a little bit. And I remember very specifically one day I was in Patagonia and I was about to start this 2-week adventure race. And this little still voice in my head says, when this is all over, I just want to be a runner again. Because it's, and I say this in the book, every sport in the distance running world or the competitive endurance world has its own tribe. And my tribe is definitely the running community. It's a different vibe than, I did the Leadville mountain bike race 10, 13 years ago. It's just, you can feel the difference with these different communities, and I feel very at home in the running world.
So your father obviously was a pretty darn good runner, whether it was 244 or 248. But we're curious how fast you eventually ran in the marathon, but also about some of the more extreme challenges that you've referred to, you tackled a bit later. Give us a quick review of some of those as well.
Oh, sure. I ran, when I was a senior in high school, ran the Palmazone Marathon in Saratoga, California, and I think it's still there, but called something else. But I ran 257.19, and that was on 40 miles a week of training, and I was getting, that was my base phase for the high school track season. It was the only time I broke 3, and there was a stretch there like in the early 90s where I went like 3:01:48, 3:01:51, 3:01. So I was always right there, but I was never committed to the big high mileage weeks that could have gotten me there when I was running at my best. But I ran Boston in '96 with a 102-degree fever because it was the 100th and I needed to get that under my belt. One time I did the one and only Disneyland marathon, and they messed up the start somehow, so they remeasured the course on the fly, and my last 2 miles took almost 20 minutes, and I wasn't going 10-minute pace, so I still feel like that would have been my second time under 3, because I ran 3:01 one more time there. But but it was, I think it was more for my writing career than anything else. I was trying to carve out a niche, and quite frankly, Amby clearly had the running world all to himself, and because you're just the OG of running. You and George both with Runner's World, and so Bob Babbitt had triathlon all to himself. So I tried to kind of make my mark with the adventure racing world, and for people who don't know, it is the old Ray Galois and the Eco Challenge. They were these endurance competitions where it was only human-powered locomotive. You had a 5-person team. Every team had to have at least one woman, and you would race point to point, through some really rugged terrain. I raced in Lesotho in South Africa. I raced in Patagonia. I raced in Borneo. So they were fun races. But again, I was never trying to be the guy who won the races, but I was always trying to be the guy who wrote about those races. And after a while, I think 1997, my kids were getting older. Let's put it that way. I had a 7-year-old and a 6-year-old and another one on the way. And I finished the raid in South Africa. I flew home and I just decided to call it a career. And that's when I decided to make the jump from just writing magazine articles to trying my hand at writing a book. And I wrote a book about my adventure racing experiences. It's called Surviving the Toughest Race on Earth. And it's done okay. And I go back and I read it, and writing it's very much like running. If you write every day, you're going to become a better writer. It's just training. And so, even though I take full credit for that book, I like the fact that the 30 years since, I have written pretty much every day, and I feel like if I rewrote the book now, it would be a lot better. It's not a bad book; it could be better.
Marty, it's just occurred to me you could get back into that adventure racing bag on the show. What's it called? Naked and Afraid or something like that? Okay, let's get serious. I haven't read all of your extreme adventure books, but I know you did a number of them. And those were first person. I was there books about big events that you entered. Then somehow you hooked up with Bill O'Reilly to write a number of the books with him. I think they went on to sell something like 18 million copies, which is, beyond a dream for any other writer. I got to wonder, how did you and O'Reilly come together?
Interesting story. So
I bet.
At the time we shared the same agent, and I was in Mammoth Lakes with my cross country team having our annual summer training camp up there. And my agent called me on a Sunday, and he said, "Can you be in New York on Tuesday to meet with a client of mine about writing a history book?" And at the time, this is 2008, 2009, 2010. I can't remember, right around there. But the economy had just collapsed. It was hard to get a book deal. So I was kind of going the co-author route to see if I could just keep writing. And so I drove through the night. I took a flight from the Reno airport into New York City. I get to lunch, and it's Bill O'Reilly. And the thing about it is, I'm not a Fox News guy, so I didn't really know, who Bill was. I mean, I knew his name, but I just didn't really know that much about him. And so we made this deal, right then to do Killing Lincoln, which was supposed to be a one-off. And I flew back to the camp. We got it done. I wrote the book, and the great thing about working with Bill when we worked together for 15 or 16 years is we never ever discuss politics. And those books are, if you read them, they're pure history. There's no political slant to them at all. And as a matter of fact, when we finally wrapped up with our last book, Confronting the Presidents, he asked me to write a little something about my point of view about our current president and our previous president, Joe Biden. And he was quite astonished to find out that I had been a liberal the whole time. So but he took it like a good sport. So, our process was really simple throughout all the years. As I would research the book. I mean, it included research travel. I would write the first draft, and Bill's actually a pretty good storyteller. So I would send Bill what I had written. He would edit it. He would put it in his voice. We'd get on the phone. We'd incorporate the two drafts. And we might go back and add a little bit more, take a little more away. But we were on the phone, for about an hour at about a time, 3 or 4 times a week. And it was a really extremely tight collaboration. And then we get down to the end of the book, we take a few months off and come back and do another one. So, and after Killing Lincoln came out, I thought we were done. And then, it just exploded. And next thing you know, Killing Kennedy was up next. And then, he said, "Let's do Killing Jesus." And I thought, oh, they're going to blaspheme us, or this is not going to go well for us. But that turned out to be another one. So at one point we had Killing Lincoln and Killing Kennedy 1-2 on the New York Times bestseller list, which was a pretty good feeling.
A number of observers have said that you and Bill O'Reilly actually made history popular. I mean, whereas, a lot of historical works I think people had considered sort of more on the boring side. And, the books that you guys did are noted for fast-moving narratives. So here's my question. Did you develop this style because it was like running? You're always moving forward?
I don't know about you guys, but like when I drive a car on the freeway, I still feel like I'm running with a pack, and I kind of move through traffic like the way that I run. Well, actually, when I used to be fast. But it's the same with this book, because I love history. I'm a total history nerd, and it really bothers me that when most people write history, they resort to this very dry, academic style of writing where it's a sleeping pill. And I thought that if we're going to do this, let's make it taut, like a spy thriller. Let's put it, in the present tense, so you always feel like you're moving along with the narrative. Let's keep the chapters short, because people feel successful when they finish a chapter. It's a known thing. They get a little endorphin hit when they finish a chapter. And if you do a bunch of short chapters, people keep turning the pages. And so then that's one of the things about writing these books is like I'd be on a plane and somebody be reading one, and they'd be reading, and then at some point they'd close the book and put it away for a while. And I always wanted to walk over to them and say, okay, what made you stop reading? How did that slow down? Because I always want people just to keep moving with these things. And I tried to do the same thing with The Long Run. I tried to make it one of those books that as people read it, they're engaged. It's not like I said, not an academic voice. The book should feel like two people out for a long run, telling war stories about the running world. And that's what I tried to do with this book.
That's a very nice analogy. Marty, at one point you became a high school cross-country coach, which, of course, we believe is one of the most important jobs in the running community. How did that happen? And what was your philosophy as a high school coach?
I still am. I'm still coaching.
I know.
When my oldest son was 14, he was a lacrosse player, and he wanted to switch high schools because his lacrosse coach was changing. And there was a new Catholic school opening up, kind of a private school. And I told him, I said, let's go take the tour, but, I'm not really sure that it's for us. Anyway, so we went and took the tour. And I met the athletic director, and I said to him, hey, if your cross-country coach needs a little bit of help, I used to compete in high school and college. I'd love to just help. He said, we don't have a coach. Do you want the job? And so that's how I became coach. And, my personal conceit was I had written all these articles for Runner's World about how to train for this or how to train for that. And I as a runner myself, I knew a lot about training. And then what I found out was I didn't know anything. I really had to go back to square one and really break it down and, just learn about the energy zones and how to build a program. And so I've been doing it since 2005, and I've got seven California state championships, and I've got a bunch of seconds and thirds. And so I've had several runners under 9 minutes in the 2 mile and under 4:10 in the 16. I've got a couple girls right now right at 5:01, and I think they're one race away from going under. And I have to say this, as much as I love to write, going to practice is the best part of my day because, it's a challenge. It's a jigsaw puzzle to put together a program. It's 154 day evolution from our first day of cross country to our state meet. So those 154 days need an overarching theme. They need a micro plan, and to build that and put that jigsaw puzzle together, and then revise it on the fly. Like if the kids show up and they've had a hard day of tests or something like that, you can't ask them to do a tough interval workout. You've got to maybe back off a little bit and maybe just do some thresh and then save the hard stuff for another day. But I love it. And the kids are just phenomenal. You have to be completely in the moment with them because if you try to BS them, they're going to see right through it. So it's like I said, it's the best part of my day.
So if there are one or a couple of lessons that you try to convey to your high school runners, Marty, what would they be?
I'm big on perseverance. I really believe that you even if things are tough, you push through. And it's the number one thing that I tell runners all the time. You have to show up every day. If you want to get good at the sport, you've got to do it every day. And I give everybody Sunday off because I think at that age they need a little bit of a rest. But the people who do well are consistent, and they show up and they do the work. And at the same time, too, when you're doing that, you also build a little community with your team where everybody's suffering together, everybody's pushing each other together. And I don't know, I love that process, that organic process of people showing up, doing the work, and getting that sense of we did more before 7 o'clock than most of the people at the school are doing.
Marty, I'm going to give you a kind of cliched question or two, and I'm expecting you to knock it out of the park, so be ready. Do you ever tell the kids, the high schoolers, that there are any life lessons that they might pick up through their running with you? And the second one is about you and your writing. Are there any parallels between training and running a strong marathon and writing a best-selling book?
What I tell the kids all the time, and it's one of those things that they don't realize it yet because they're too young. But I'll tell them stuff like that. I say the lessons you learn as a runner, with how you push through self-doubt, how you do the hard work that most people don't want to do, the way that you persevere and you take a long-term view of something as opposed to just a short-term solution. I keep telling them that those are things that are going to hold you over when you're in a marriage, when you're in a tough job, when you're raising your children. All those things are going to that sense of perseverance and all the lessons you learn as a runner will carry over. And they pay attention. they kind of roll their eyes a little bit, but they're going to get it. I suppose but it's the same thing when you write a book. You don't write a book in a day. Like again, when I was writing for Runner's World, if you give me a 1,500 word assignment, I could write 1,500 words in 3 or 4 hours and kind of polish it up a little bit and send it to you, and mission accomplished. Whereas a book, 80 to 100,000 words, 300 to 400 pages. For me, it's a 6-month process. I sit my butt in the chair, 5 to 6 days a week, and so it does, and it's kind of like a marathon because the first 10,000 words are the toughest, but you're just getting going. You're kind of getting into a rhythm, and then you kind of get to that halfway mark. The Wellesley of a book, 40,000 words, where you're halfway there and you still have so much more to go, and you can't.
And
see
nobody's out there on the streets cheering for you like they are at Wellesley.
No, not anybody. It's just me and my dog that farts in my office, and so and then then you get to that interminable. You get to the 70,000 word mark, and you're closing in on 300 pages, and every day you want to be able to write those final 10,000 words in a single day because you can see the finish there, and then but you just kind of keep plugging away. The difference with a book is but once you finish, you're not really done. That's just the first draft. Then you got to massage it. You got to find your typos. You've got to take out all the stuff that makes it too slow. And that's actually the fun part of the process, though, because by then you've got a finished product. So if you put it marathon stuff, it would be like as if you finished your marathon and then you get to go to have a cold beer and edit your pages.
So, Marty, your book, The Long Run, has a lot of heroes in it. I mean, there's Gary Merca, there's Oprah Winfrey, and there's just all kinds of others. And you even go back to Pheidippides and Bill Bowerman. I don't mean that they were contemporaries, but you do go back. What story or stories meant the most to you, both living through them and then writing them, many years later?
It's that part of the book where Bowerman brings jogging to America. Having spent time in Eugene, and I've been to the old Hayward Field, I've been to the new Hayward Field. For me, Bowerman, Kenny Moore did a masterful book on him, but Bowerman is one of those people that he did everything. He's one of those people who brought jogging to America. He founded Nike. He coached he coached the Olympic team. He was so foundational to our sport, and he's all but forgotten. And I got to talk to Shorter, I got to talk to Rogers, I got to talk to all these great people. But the people that I wish I could have talked to are Bowerman, Godovites, and Prefontaine for this book, because those three people were such powerful characters.
Mm-hmm. Marty, you know a lot more about history and historical writing than I do, but I'm assuming historians can't change what has happened in the past, but they can view it and analyze it in their own and perhaps original ways. Are there any points in the long run where you view a historical event or two in a way that perhaps you don't think it's been observed previously?
Yeah, there's a bunch, and it can all surprise me. For instance, I always thought, Shorter, boom, Shorter wins the marathon and then explodes. And then I found I did the numbers. If you look at the competitor numbers for Boston, for New York, and for all marathons, they didn't really take off after he won. I mean, people wanted to run, and Runner's World magazine was Runner's World magazine finally, and Nike was finally Nike. But people didn't immediately flock to the marathon because Shorter did it, and it really only happened after the 1976 New York City Marathon when they did the 5 boroughs race. And to go back, I mean, I had a lot of fun really going to the Pheidippides thing, because the Pheidippides myth it's been distorted in so many different ways, and I feel like I finally got it right. I feel like the whole thing about the 1908 Olympic Marathon, people always saying that the course became 26 miles, 385 yards because of the British monarchy, when it didn't. So it was nice to tell that story. But I didn't know any of that stuff, so that's why I love the research so much. You go into it with these preconceived notions, then you start just going down the rabbit hole, drilling down, and finding out the truth behind all these things. That thing that you, Amby, that you said about Joni, the women's movement didn't really explode until Oprah. You needed Joni to get to Oprah, you needed Greta to get to Oprah, but when Oprah ran that 1992 Marine Corps Marathon, that's when the women's movement exploded. So to find out all these things and to put them in print in a way that people can debate, and I'm happy to debate anybody because it's super fun to have done this research, but I found it all fascinating.
So let me switch gears a little bit, Marty, and get to you currently. Your own running these days or fitness, how much are you doing and how does it contribute to your well-being and even to your productivity and to your writing?
Well, I'm trying to, I'm running like 10 to 15 miles a week. I'm not tearing up the trails, but I live right next to, my front door is 500 meters from a huge wilderness park. So I'm either out there running or, doing a walk run or just doing hill repeats, 3 or 4 days a week. I would like to get back to, I don't really feel like I need to run another marathon. I gave those up in 2008, but at the same time, there was a time when, like, my brother-in-law called me one day, probably 25 years ago, and he said, I'm running the LA Marathon on Sunday. Do you want to come pace me? And this is on a Friday afternoon, and I just banded the race, and I was able to jump in and just run a marathon with him. It'd be nice to get back to that kind of fitness. I don't see it coming, but I do love that I'm on the trails every day in one shape or form, and it's I don't know. You guys know this. If I'm writing and I'm stuck, nothing beats. You can solve a problem within the first 5 minutes of the run. It just seems magically to disappear. And so, I'm 64 now. I'm getting older. I really want to get to the point where I'm not as worried about my health and my fitness because I'm taking good care of myself. And because I see a lot of people my age, and you guys got a couple of years on me, but I see people my age starting to just stop trying. And the big thing is I don't want to stop trying. I want to keep doing this thing. Some days the runs are easy, some days the runs are not. That's running.
Marty, one last question before we get to our final two that we ask everybody. I'm sure you're hoping that readers of your new book, The Long Run, will enjoy every page and keep paging through the stories and the chapters. But is there more than enjoyment? Is there a message or a meaning to The Long Run that you hope people will take away from the book?
Yeah, I think the running is universal. It's so many people I've talked to, they'll say like, oh, I used to hate running, then I took it up. And I just think that there's something to the daily process. I remember when I was like 14 years old, and I was looking at my dad, and he ran every day, and I thought, I'm 14, and I think he was like 45 at the time. Like, do I have to run every day for the rest of my life? But then you get to a certain point, and you realize you kind of just do. You brush your teeth every day. You might as well go for a run. I mean, it's just something you do. It's just part of life.
So those two questions that Amby just referred to, Marty, that we end our podcast with. The first is directly related to the title. What's the state of the sport of running from your perspective? What's good? What could be better? And since you're a high school coach, maybe you can talk about the state of high school running as part of your answer to all of that.
First of all, I think the state of the sport is amazing. I mean, you look at it, they had over 1 million people that applied to run the London Marathon this year, which is phenomenal. So the runners are there, and so much of that is, things like the new technology in shoes. And it's been fun writing this book because my vision of the running world has been shaped by my own stuff. Like, my time as a high school and college runner, as a marathoner, and now as a coach. And this has forced me to kind of go back out into the broader running community, the people that do the Disneyland half marathons and the people that, that did the New York City half. And it's, I've been looking at a lot of the Instagram reels and stuff. And it's really neat to see that there's so much going on, and there's so much positivity in the running world. You see people of all body shapes, all ethnicities. It's just one of those sports that it's open to everyone. From the high school point of view, it's kind of mixed. I mean, people are running faster than ever, and I'm able to run kids. We train at maybe a higher volume than we've ever trained before, but we're also losing a lot of kids to, the club sports, like soccer and lacrosse, where the coaches demand that the kids don't do any other sport other than their sport. And I think running, well, there are two subsets. Running itself is something I think some of those same kids will get to later in life. But track and field is definitely suffering because we're losing a lot of kids to those sports, and the sport of track and field has been relegated to, I saw a cornhole tournament on ESPN last week, but you're not going to see a track meet on ESPN. I mean, that's kind of where we are in the state of track and field. And so I'm on the board of the USA Track and Field Foundation, and we try to raise money to help would-be Olympians, achieve their goals, and that's been very, very satisfying for me. But I don't know, as a high school running coach, it's a wonderful thing when these freshmen come in and their parents have never seen a cross-country race before. They don't know what it's like, and they show up on a Saturday morning in September, and they think that the cross-country meet is going to be just a couple kids, kicking the can around the course, and then they get out there and they see, thousands of competitors and thousands of spectators, and they see, these canopies for the team tents, and you realize that a high school cross-country invitational gets far more people to show up and spectate than the high school football game that took place the night before, but it never makes the papers. It's just one of those things, and I'd like to see it get back to the thing where a high school cross country, harkening back to the old, Jim Ryan, in 1964-65, where it was an event, because I really feel like our sport is very special. I love it. My passion. I compete as a coach so hard. I mean, I'm just a moron out on the course on a race day, but I just love everything that we do.
Marty, thank you for that. The last question is: we give you 3 fairy godmother wishes, and only 3, and we'd like you to make these a little bit more personal. You can talk about your hopes for success of this running book, The Long Run, or hopes for success of your high school team or your own health and fitness in the coming years. You want to take a crack at 3 good wishes?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, definitely. I would hope that The Long Run finds an audience. I feel like they're runners. Again, this is for the runners from 18 to 80, 85 or 95, George. And so it's it's a book for everybody, and I hope it finds an audience. And I've got a really strong girls team this year, and I'm hoping that they can win the state championship this year. But I've also got an up and coming boys team, and I'm hoping they can find it. I think the last one is I just wish for courage. This again, I'm looking forward to. My wife just passed away. I mean, I'm going to be alone here for a while, so I'm trying to pull it together and find what it's like to be on my own, and not lose my fitness, and use running as the way that's going to help me keep my shit together.
Marty, we did not know that about your wife, so sincere condolences for sure.
Thanks, Amby. Yeah,
that's a big one. And we also hope your other wishes come true, because they are really good ones. So that's it for our conversation with runner coach and best-selling author Marty Dugard, who has a new book, The Long Run, that's coming out in mid-April.
Marty, thanks so much, and let me add my condolences to Amby's. I just loved having you on the podcast and talking about your book. It was terrific. I really enjoyed the book, and I think for the world of running, to have a book on running that is a real page turner, which this is gonna mean an awful lot. So good luck with that.
Well, hey, you guys are the OGs of the distance running world. Amby, obviously I owe my career to you. You're the reason. The assignment you gave me to cover the Ray Gaulois was the reason I got fired from my corporate job and decided to go full time as a writer all these years later. And George, when I wrote the book, and you were so patient with me, and you told me so much about that first five boroughs race, it's pretty splendid. So, guys, it's been such an honor to be on this podcast. I appreciate it very much.
Marty, thanks for those comments. I tell everyone, every runner and every writer that they're entirely responsible for their own successes because, of course, I know how much hard work it takes to train, run for a marathon, or write the kinds of books you've been writing for a long time. So we're just thrilled with the success that you have had.
Amby, you and I remember Marty Dugard from many years ago when he was writing for us at Runner's World, but we hadn't caught up with him in really many decades. So I thought it was fascinating to hear about his career as a book writer, and especially about his new running book, The Long Run. But first off, tell me what you thought about our conversation with Marty.
I think, George, I was most struck by something that came at the very end when Marty told us that which we didn't know, which was that his wife had died just a couple of weeks prior to our conversation. We didn't know that. I'm not sure we had enough time to give him our full condolences, but we certainly do now, and to his family as well. I hope this book really does become successful because I think it has many important stories that should be shared really widely. There are going to be a lot of younger runners who don't know these stories at all, and it's going to be an education for them in a very, very readable manner. And it's really about the decade or 15 years when the first running boom was such a vibrant and unexpected social phenomenon in the United States and then across the world. It was really galvanizing in a way that things can't quite equal after the first big revolution. He's got it all here, and I enjoyed the book a lot, and I certainly hope many others do as well. George, what did you think about our conversation with Marty?
Yeah, Amby, about his book, you said, that was a galvanizing time, and you and I certainly were there in the thick of it. And Marty referred to it as a revolution, which I liked, and he really highlighting how the sport transformed global lifestyles, and events like Frank Shorter's 1972 Olympic marathon victory sparked a massive movement and something that, really took place globally. And then the importance of a few significant, influential figures, Steve Prefontaine, Greta Weitz, Joan Benoit Samuelson, and Bill Rogers. I think it's going to be an important book, and I really am hoping, as you say, a lot of people really get to read it, because what Marty does, and we saw this in the books that he wrote that became such bestsellers with Bill O'Reilly, is he avoids that dry academic prose that's often what we think of as historical writing, and he it's like a taut spy thriller, the way he just keeps you on the edge of your seat and turning pages as fast as you can. And he certainly knows how to make history come to life. I thought he did a wonderful job.
I think you're absolutely right about that, George. I was just thinking to myself, you could read this book and you'd end up with a PhD in running boom history without having to go through the 6-year grind of writing papers and facing exams and things like that. So thank you for your thoughts. That's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. George and I hope you enjoyed joining us as much as we enjoyed sharing the time with you, and we'll be back again soon with another episode. Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast hosts, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving, onward